The sterile gleam of the polished marble floors in the Vance penthouse reflected the morning light with an almost blinding intensity, a perfect mirror to the life lived within its walls. Eleanor Vance, CEO of Vance Global, surveyed her meticulously organized desk, a fortress of glass and steel in the expansive living area that doubled as her command center. Every document, every pen, every digital device was precisely where it belonged, reflecting the ironclad control she exerted over her empire and, by extension, her existence. Her dark, tailored suit, a second skin of power, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, a stark contrast to the pristine environment. She picked up a crystal paperweight, turning it over in her hand, the facets catching the light, fragmenting it into tiny, fleeting rainbows. Her gaze, however, was distant, fixed on nothing in particular, yet intensely focused, as if dissecting an invisible problem. Eleanor was a woman who had built her success brick by painstaking brick, through relentless ambition and an unyielding will. She had no patience for inefficiency, no tolerance for sentimentality, and certainly no time for weakness, especially her own. This philosophy had propelled her to the pinnacle of corporate success, but it had also carved deep lines of solitude around her eyes, etched a permanent, almost imperceptible frown between her brows. The faint scent of lemon polish and fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen, a familiar morning symphony that signaled the arrival of Maria. Maria, her housekeeper for the past 5 years, was a phantom presence, moving through the vast apartment with an almost preternatural quietness. Eleanor rarely saw her, preferring to issue instructions through a series of meticulous notes left on the kitchen counter, or brief clipped exchanges that never ventured beyond the professional. Maria was an employee, a cog in the well-oiled machine of Eleanor's life, and nothing more. Their interactions were transactional, devoid of warmth, stripped bare of any personal connection. Eleanor preferred it that way. Personal connections were messy, unpredictable, and ultimately a distraction. Today, however, a sense of unease gnawed at Eleanor, a subtle discord in her perfectly orchestrated routine. It wasn't the market fluctuations she'd been tracking, nor the pending merger she was meticulously orchestrating. It was something far more mundane, yet persistently irritating. A misplaced file yesterday, a smudge on a pristine glass surface, a slight delay in her morning coffee. Minor infractions, yes, but to Eleanor they were symptoms of a larger issue, a lapse in the rigorous standards she demanded, and those standards applied to everyone in her orbit, especially those paid to maintain the order of her personal space. She straightened a stack of reports, her movements precise, deliberate. The slight shift of papers created a barely audible rustle, a sound that seemed amplified in the cavernous silence of the penthouse. Eleanor prided herself on her perception, her ability to detect the minutiae, the hidden flaws that others overlooked. It was this acute attention to detail that had allowed her to spot opportunities and avert disasters in the corporate world, and it was this same sharpness that now focused on Maria. Maria, in her simple, clean uniform, emerged from the kitchen, carrying a silver tray for Eleanor's breakfast, a perfectly sliced avocado on whole wheat toast, a bowl of berries, and a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea. Her steps were soft, almost imperceptible on the marble, a testament to years of quiet service. Her face, framed by dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, was a landscape of quiet endurance, marked by lines that spoke of experience rather than age. Her eyes, a deep, warm brown, held a perpetual gentleness, a quiet sadness that Eleanor had often noticed, but never truly considered. They would meet Eleanor's gaze for a fleeting second, then drop, a habit of deference born of her position. "Good morning, Maria," Eleanor said, her voice cool and even, devoid of inflection. It was more a statement than a greeting, a recognition of presence rather than an acknowledgement of a person. "Good morning, Miss Vance," Maria replied, her voice soft, accented, a melodic murmur that barely disturbed the air. She placed the tray on a small side table beside Eleanor's desk, her movements efficient and practiced. Eleanor watched her, a critical eye sweeping over the details. the slight tremor in Maria's hand as she set down the teacup, barely perceptible. The subtle slump of her shoulders, a hint of weariness. Eleanor catalogued these observations, not out of concern, but as data points. Efficiency, she reminded herself, was paramount. "Maria," Eleanor began, her voice cutting through the silence, making Maria pause as she turned to leave. "I've noticed a few things recently."
Maria turned back slowly, her expression unreadable, a practiced neutrality settling over her features. "Yes, Miss Vance. The report I left on the kitchen counter yesterday," Eleanor continued, her gaze unwavering. "It was not placed in the correct folder. It was in the pending folder, instead of actioned. A minor detail, perhaps, but one that disrupts my workflow." Maria's eyes flickered, a momentary shadow passing through them. "My apologies, Miss Vance. I must have misread your note." "My notes are always precise, Maria," she stated, her tone sharpening almost imperceptibly. "Accuracy is crucial. And the dusting in the library? I found a film of dust on the top shelf of the legal section this morning. Unacceptable." Maria lowered her head slightly. "I will be more careful, Miss Vance. I promise." "Promises are not enough, Maria. Results are what I require. I expect perfection. You understand that, don't you?" "Yes, Miss Vance, I understand." Maria's voice was barely a whisper now, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Eleanor sighed, a sound of mild exasperation. "And yesterday, my coffee was lukewarm. A small thing, yes, but it indicates a lack of attention. My schedule is demanding. I need everything to be precise, predictable, and flawless. My home is an extension of my professional environment. It needs to function with the same level of impeccable order." Maria remained silent, her gaze fixed on the polished floor. The quiet intensity of the moment stretched between them, thick with unspoken implications. Eleanor felt a familiar tightening in her chest, a sense of righteous indignation. She paid Maria a generous salary for her services, far above market rate for a housekeeper, ensuring her a comfortable life. In return, she expected nothing less than absolute diligence and perfection. Anything less felt like a personal affront, a dereliction of duty. "I need to know that my instructions are being followed implicitly, Maria, that my expectations are being met without question or error. Lately, I've had to question that." Maria finally lifted her gaze, her brown eyes meeting Eleanor's, and for a brief, unsettling moment, Eleanor thought she saw something in them, a flash of pain, a deep, wounded sadness that seemed to ripple beneath the surface of Maria's usual composure. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that familiar stoic resignation. "I will redouble my efforts, Miss Vance," she said, her voice steady now, albeit still soft. "There will be no further complaints." Eleanor nodded, a curt, dismissive gesture. "See that there aren't. Now, you may go." Maria turned and retreated, her quiet footsteps fading down the long hallway toward the service entrance. Eleanor watched her go, a sense of dissatisfaction lingering. It wasn't just the recent errors. It was a vague, indefinable feeling, a sense that Maria had become less present, less invested. It was an unacceptable drain on Eleanor's mental energy, an unnecessary distraction from the monumental tasks that lay before her. Later that day, Eleanor found herself in the corporate boardroom, surrounded by her executive team. The air was thick with the scent of ambition and expensive coffee. Projections flashed across the large screen, market analyses were dissected, and strategic maneuvers were debated with the precision of a chess game. Eleanor, at the head of the table, commanded the room with an effortless authority, her mind a steel trap, her decisions swift and incisive. She was in her element here, where logic reigned supreme and emotions were relegated to the realm of weakness. Yet even amidst the high-stakes discussions, a sliver of her attention was still snagged on the domestic irritations of the morning. The dust in the library, the lukewarm coffee, the misplaced file. It was illogical, she knew, to allow such trivial matters to intrude upon her professional focus, but they persisted, a tiny, buzzing annoyance at the periphery of her consciousness. It was a symptom of a larger problem, a lack of absolute control. As the day wore on, Eleanor found herself making a decision, a cold, calculated choice that felt entirely rational in her analytical mind. She couldn't afford any weak links in her chain, not in her business, and certainly not in her personal life, which was, after all, merely a support system for her professional endeavors. The slight decline in Maria's performance, however subtle, was a risk she was unwilling to take. That evening, when Eleanor returned to the penthouse, the silence was deeper than usual. The apartment was immaculate, every surface gleaming, every cushion fluffed to perfection. Maria had clearly spent the day compensating for her earlier perceived failures, her efforts almost palpable in the intensified order of the home. But it was too late. Eleanor had already made up her mind. She found Maria in the kitchen, wiping down the already spotless countertops. The scent of a faint floral cleaner hung in the air. Maria looked up, her expression expectant, perhaps even a little hopeful, as if seeking approval. Eleanor stood framed in the doorway, her silhouette imposing against the backdrop of the city lights twinkling beyond the panoramic windows. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, almost detached, utterly devoid of emotion. "Maria, I need to speak with you." Maria put down her cloth, her movements slow, deliberate. She turned fully to face Eleanor, her hands clasped again, a silent ritual of deference. "Yes, Miss Mance?" "I've made a decision regarding your employment here," Eleanor began, watching Maria's face carefully, searching for a reaction. There was none, only that familiar, quiet stillness. "While I appreciate your years of service and your recent efforts, I've come to the conclusion that it's time for a change." Maria's breath hitched, a faint, almost inaudible sound. Her eyes, however, remained fixed on Eleanor, an unwavering gaze that held a depth of emotion Eleanor couldn't quite decipher. "Effective immediately," Eleanor continued, pushing past the momentary discomfort she felt at the sight of Maria's sudden paleness. "Your services will no longer be required. I've already arranged for your final pay, including a generous severance package, to be transferred to your account by the end of the week. You'll have until the end of the month to vacate the staff quarters. I've also arranged for a moving company to assist you should you require it." The words hung in the air, cold and definitive, each one a hammer blow. Maria's face, which had been so carefully composed, finally fractured. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her eyes, those deep brown eyes, filled slowly, inexorably with tears, though none spilled over. It was a silent, profound grief that seemed to emanate from her very core, radiating outwards, chilling the air. Eleanor felt a flicker of something, a momentary prick of discomfort, but she quickly suppressed it. Business was business. This was a decision based on logic and efficiency, not emotion. Sentimentality had no place in the corporate world, nor in her personal sphere. "Do you understand, Maria?" Eleanor pressed, her voice unwavering. Maria nodded, a slow, almost imperceptible movement. A single tear, finally escaping, traced a path down her cheek, a shimmering track on her weathered skin. She swallowed, her throat visibly working. "Yes, Miss Vance?" she whispered, her voice hoarse, barely audible. "I understand." "Good," Eleanor said, a sense of finality settling over her. She had handled it professionally, cleanly, with appropriate compensation. There was nothing more to be said. But Maria's voice, though soft, stopped her. "Miss Vance." Eleanor paused, turning back, her patience wearing thin. "Yes, Maria." Maria took a step closer, her hands still clasped, but now trembling. Her gaze was direct, unwavering, and filled with a raw, desperate emotion that unnerved Eleanor. "Before I go, there is something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long, long time ago." Eleanor frowned, a ripple of irritation spreading through her. She hated unexpected deviations from her meticulously planned script. "What could possibly be so important, Maria? This conversation is over." "No," she said, her voice rising slightly. "It is not over. Not until you hear this." She took another step, her eyes burning into Eleanor's, a desperate plea, a challenge, a lifetime of unspoken words finally breaking free. "I am your mother, Eleanor, your biological mother." The words hung in the air, shattering the pristine silence of the penthouse, detonating with the force of a 1,000-pound bomb. Eleanor felt the floor tilt beneath her feet, the perfectly ordered world she had constructed around herself cracking, splintering into a million jagged pieces. The crisp, clean air suddenly felt thick, suffocating. "What?" Eleanor breathed, the single word escaping her lips like a foreign sound, alien and disbelieving. Her mind, so accustomed to logical processing, simply refused to compute the information. It was absurd, impossible, a cruel joke. Maria nodded, tears now streaming freely down her face, her eyes filled with an unbearable anguish, yet also a fierce, desperate love. "Yes, Eleanor, I am your mother, the one who gave birth to you, the one who held you in my arms for a brief, precious time before I had to let you go."
Eleanor stumbled back, hitting the polished marble counter with a jarring thud. Her perfect composure evaporated, replaced by a storm of incredulity, anger, and a terrifying, sickening confusion. That's insane! You're lying! My parents, my real parents, they adopted me. They told me everything. You're just a maid. You're nobody. Her voice rose, raw and ragged, utterly unlike her usual controlled tone. "They are your parents, yes," Maria conceded, her voice a broken whisper. "They raised you. They loved you. But I am your blood. I am the one who carried you, who felt your first kick, who gave you life." Eleanor stared at Maria, her mind racing, scrambling to reconcile the woman she had just fired with the impossible claim now hanging in the air. This quiet, deferential maid who had served her coffee and cleaned her floors for 5 years was claiming to be her mother. The woman she had dismissed without a second thought, the woman she had deemed inefficient, replaceable. The sheer audacity, the cruel irony was almost unbearable. "Prove it," Eleanor demanded, her voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "Prove this ridiculous, disgusting lie." Maria reached into the pocket of her uniform, her hand trembling as she pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. It was an old, simple piece, worn smooth in places by years of handling. She opened it with a click, revealing 2 faded sepia-toned photographs. One was of a young woman, strikingly similar to Maria, but with a vibrancy and innocence Eleanor had never seen in her maid. The other was of a baby, swaddled in a blanket, its tiny face a blur of features. But Eleanor recognized something in the baby's eyes, a fleeting resemblance to her own infant pictures, a familiar curve of the cheek. "This was taken a week after you were born," Maria said, her choked with emotion, holding out the locket. "This was all I had left of you." Eleanor snatched the locket, her fingers brushing against Maria's, a jolt of something electric, unsettling passing between them. She stared at the faded image of the baby, then at the young woman, and back to Maria's tear-streaked face. The resemblance was undeniable,
a subtle echo in the structure of their cheekbones, the shape of their eyes, the set of their jaw. A cold dread seeped into Eleanor's bones, a terrifying realization beginning to dawn. "My parents," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible, laced with venomous disbelief. They told me my birth mother was a young woman, a student, who couldn't care for me. They said she wanted me to have a better life. They said she never wanted to see me again." "That was true in a way," Maria admitted, her voice thick with pain. "I was young. I was alone. I had nothing. And yes, I wanted you to have a better life, a life I could never give you. But I never said I didn't want to see you again. I wanted to see you every single day. I lived for the hope of seeing you, even from afar." The words hung in the air, heavy with decades of unspoken sorrow. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. This woman before her, the woman she had just fired for a dusty shelf and lukewarm coffee, was the woman who had brought her into the world. The woman she had dismissed as insignificant, as merely a service provider, held the most profound, fundamental connection to her existence. "How?" Eleanor demanded, her voice raw, disbelieving. How did you end up here, in my house, cleaning my home?" Maria took a deep, shuddering breath, her gaze fixed on Eleanor, her entire being radiating a fragile hope, a desperate need to be heard. "It was fate, perhaps, or a cruel twist of destiny. After I gave you up, I tried to build a life, but it was always hard, always a struggle. I never forgot you, not for a single day. I searched for you, discreetly when I could. I knew your adopted parents' names, the Vances. I knew they were prominent in the city. And then, 5 years ago, I saw an advertisement, a position for a housekeeper in the Vance residence. I recognized the address. I knew it was your family home. My heart, it nearly stopped. I applied, not knowing for sure if it was you, but praying, hoping it was. And then I saw you, Eleanor. The first time I saw you, walking through the door, so strong, so beautiful, so much like the baby I remembered. I knew it was you, my daughter." Eleanor stared at her, a chill spreading through her veins. This woman, her maid, had known all along. All these years she had watched her, served her, cleaned after her, all while harboring this monumental secret. The deception, the sheer weight of it, felt suffocating. "Why didn't you say anything?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper, laced with venomous disbelief. "Why didn't you keep this from me? Why did you let me treat you like this?"
Maria's tears flowed freely now, her face a mask of profound regret. "I was afraid, Eleanor, so afraid. Afraid of rejection, afraid of ruining your life, afraid you would hate me. You had such a good life, a life I could never have given you. I thought it was enough to just be near you, to see you grow, to know you were safe and happy, to hear your laughter, even if it wasn't meant for me, to protect you, even if you never knew I was doing it." The words tumbled out, a torrent of long-suppressed emotion. Eleanor felt a strange, dizzying sensation, as if the ground beneath her had vanished. Her mind replayed countless moments, Maria's quiet efficiency, her gentle deference, the fleeting glances, the subtle ways she had anticipated Eleanor's needs, the almost maternal concern she sometimes glimpsed in Maria's eyes, which she had always dismissed as mere professional diligence. "You watched me," Eleanor said, her voice hollow, "while I barked at you, while I criticized you, while I treated you like a stranger, an employee, nothing more." The shame began to creep in, cold and insidious, replacing the initial shock and anger. "It was my penance," Maria whispered, "for giving you up, for not being strong enough to keep you. Every harsh word, every demanding task. I accepted it. I deserved it. As long as I could be near you, I was willing to bear anything. Eleanor felt a scream building in her throat, a primal sound of rage and despair. The carefully constructed facade of her life, built on order and control, was crumbling. The foundation, she now realized, had been a lie, or at least a profound omission. Her parents, her adopted parents, the Vances, had given her a wonderful life, but they had also kept this secret, this monumental truth hidden from her. My parents, Eleanor repeated, her voice laced with accusation. Did they know? Did they know you were here? Maria hesitated, then slowly shook her head. No, I never told them. I applied under my maiden name, Rodriguez. They wouldn't have recognized it. And I never revealed my past to them. It was my secret to keep and my burden to bear. Eleanor sank onto a nearby kitchen stool, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Her world, which had been so clear, so defined, was now a swirling vortex of confusion and conflicting emotions. The woman she had just fired, the woman she had deemed unworthy of her continued employment, was her mother, the woman who had given her life. Tell me, Eleanor demanded, her voice low, raw, with a desperate need for answers. Tell me everything, from the very beginning. Maria nodded, her eyes still brimming with tears, but a faint light of hope, of an ancient longing now shone through them. She sat opposite Eleanor, on the pristine kitchen floor, a position of humility that now felt deeply ironic, almost a mockery of their true relationship. And she began to speak, her voice soft but steady, recounting a story that spanned decades, a tale of poverty, sacrifice, and a mother's enduring, silent love. She spoke of her youth in a small village, far from the glittering skyscrapers of the city. A life of hardship, but also of simple joys, of close-knit communities and enduring traditions. She was young, barely 18, when she fell in love with a charming, itinerant worker who promised her the world, then vanished as quickly as he appeared, leaving her pregnant and alone. My family, Maria recounted, her voice tinged with the sorrow of distant memory. They were traditional. Unmarried, pregnant, it was a scandal. I was sent away to a distant relative in the city to hide my shame. I worked odd jobs, cleaning, sewing, anything to survive, but I was so young, so unprepared. She described the terror of impending motherhood, the overwhelming sense of inadequacy, the crushing weight of societal judgment. She spoke of the day Eleanor was born, a tiny, perfect bundle, and the agonizing, heart-wrenching decision she was forced to make. I held you for only a few hours, Eleanor. Your skin was so soft, your cries so tiny. My heart, it broke into a million pieces. But I knew I couldn't keep you. I had nothing, no home, no money, no support. I was barely able to feed myself. I wanted you to have a chance, a life free from poverty, free from shame, a life I could only dream of. She recounted meeting the adoption agency, the kind social worker, the promise of a loving, stable home. The Vances, a well-respected, wealthy couple who desperately wanted a child. They had been thoroughly vetted, their lives impeccable, their love for their future child undeniable.
They promised me, Maria said, her gaze meeting Eleanor's, that you would be loved, that you would have every opportunity. And I saw it in their eyes, Eleanor. They truly loved you before they even met you. It was the hardest decision of my life, but I truly believed it was the best thing for you, for your future. Eleanor listened, utterly mesmerized, her initial anger slowly giving way to a profound, unsettling grief. She saw the young Maria, terrified and alone, making an impossible choice.
She saw the immense sacrifice, the depth of a mother's love that could choose to let go for the sake of her child's future. Maria continued, detailing her life after the adoption. The years of struggling, of working tirelessly in various menial jobs, always haunted by the memory of her child. The quiet suffering, the unspoken longing. She never married, never had other children. Eleanor was her only child, her only love, a secret sorrow she carried deep within her heart. "I tried to find you," Maria explained, her voice tinged with a desperate hope. "When I saved enough money, I hired the private investigator, but they couldn't give me your exact location due to privacy laws. But they gave me enough information, clues, your adopted parents' names, the general area where you lived. And then, when I saw the job advertisement for a housekeeper at the Vance residence, it was like a sign, a miracle. I knew it had to be you." Eleanor remembered the early days of Maria's employment, the almost overwhelming sense of care Maria seemed to exude, the subtle tenderness in her touch as she rearranged Eleanor's childhood photographs, the way she would sometimes hum a lullaby under her breath, a melody Eleanor faintly recognized from her own distant memory, though she couldn't place it. She had dismissed it as a quirky habit, a cultural peculiarity. Now those memories took on a chilling, profound significance. "So for 5 years," Eleanor said, her voice raw, "you've been here, watching me, cleaning up after me, listening to my complaints, and you said nothing?" "What could I say, Eleanor?" Maria pleaded, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "How could I shatter your world? You had a perfect life, a powerful position. You were everything I wanted you to be. I was just the maid, the one you fired. How could I, a poor, uneducated woman, claim to be your mother without risking everything, without risking your hatred, your disgust?" The weight of Maria's words pressed down on Eleanor, crushing her with a sudden, overwhelming wave of shame and regret. She remembered her own words from that morning, the cold, dismissive tone, the accusations of inefficiency. She had fired her own mother, her biological mother, who had sacrificed everything for her, who had silently served her for half a decade simply to be near her. The cruelty of it, the colossal, tragic irony was almost too much to bear. "I called you inefficient," Eleanor whispered, her voice breaking. "I told you your coffee was lukewarm. I accused you of not paying attention. And all this time—" She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Maria reached out, her hand hovering hesitantly for a moment, then gently taking Eleanor's trembling hand. Her touch was warm, surprisingly firm, imbued with a lifetime of unspoken affection. "It's okay, mi hija. It's okay. You didn't know. How could you know?" Eleanor pulled her hand away sharply, not out of revulsion, but out of a sudden, overwhelming flood of conflicting emotions. Her brain, the logical, analytical instrument that had guided her through every challenge, was now in chaos. The woman who gave her life, the woman who loved her from afar, was the woman she had treated with such cold disdain. The chasm between who she thought she was and who she now discovered herself to be was vast and terrifying. "It's not okay," Eleanor said, her voice rising again, a raw, desperate cry. "None of this is okay. My whole life, everything I thought I knew, it's a lie. My parents, they kept this from me." "They protected you, Eleanor," Maria interjected gently. "They loved you. They gave you everything. They probably thought they were doing the right thing, sparing you the pain of my story." "Sparing me?" Eleanor scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "They lied to me for decades. They let me believe my birth mother was just a vague, distant figure, someone who didn't care. And you watched me. You let me live this lie." The anger, hot and sharp, flared within Eleanor, eclipsing the initial shock and grief. It was easier to be angry, to lash out, than to confront the profound, unsettling truth of her own complicity, her own ignorance. She had been so blind, so consumed by her own world, her own demands, that she had failed to see the quiet suffering, the silent love, right under her nose. "I didn't want to hurt you, mija," Maria pleaded, her voice thick with renewed tears. "I never wanted to cause you pain. I only ever wanted your happiness." "And what about my happiness now?" Eleanor shot back, her voice trembling with fury. "You think this makes me happy? To find out the woman I've been treating like dirt for 5 years, the woman I just fired, is my mother? To know that my entire foundation is built on a secret? How can I ever trust anyone again?" Maria flinched, her face crumpling. "I know it's a shock. I know it's painful. But please, Eleanor, try to understand. Try to see it from my side. What choice did I have? What could I do?" Eleanor pushed herself up from the stool, pacing the pristine kitchen floor, her movements agitated, restless. The silence that usually comforted her now felt oppressive, suffocating. She needed to escape, to breathe, to process this monumental revelation. "I need time," Eleanor finally said, her voice strained, her gaze avoiding Maria's pleading eyes. "I need to think. I need to understand what this means. For me, for everything." Maria nodded slowly, a deep sigh escaping her lips. "I understand, mija. Take all the time you need. But please, Eleanor, don't hate me. Don't hate your mother." Eleanor didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing loudly on the marble, a stark contrast to Maria's usual quiet tread. She left the kitchen, the penthouse, the entire building, stepping out into the cold, unforgiving night air of the city, leaving Maria alone in the silent, gleaming kitchen amidst the shattered fragments of their shared, secret past. The next few days were a blur of internal chaos for Eleanor. She canceled all her meetings, locking herself away in her study, the corporate world temporarily forgotten. The news of her abrupt absence sent ripples of concern through Vance Global, but Eleanor was oblivious, lost in a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The revelation had stripped away layers of her identity, leaving her feeling raw and exposed. She had always prided herself on her self-made image, her strength, her independence. Now she felt like a pawn in a larger, hidden drama, a character in a story she hadn't known was being written. The anger simmered, a constant companion, directed at her adopted parents for their secrecy, at Maria for her silence, and perhaps most painfully at herself for her blindness. She pulled out old photo albums, sifting through images of her childhood. Her adopted parents, Robert and Elizabeth Vance, were smiling, loving, always present. They had given her everything: a secure home, an elite education, unwavering support, and an abundance of opportunities. They had been her rock, her foundation. How could they have kept such a monumental secret from her? The betrayal felt profound, a deep wound that festered in her heart. Then her thoughts would inevitably drift to Maria, the quiet maid with her gentle hands and sad eyes. She replayed every interaction, every clipped order, every dismissive glance. The shame was a physical ache, a tightening in her chest. She had treated her own mother, the woman who had suffered unimaginable pain to ensure her survival, with such cold indifference. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. She remembered a particular incident, a year or so ago. Eleanor had been ill with a nasty flu, bedridden and miserable. Maria had, despite her usual boundaries, brought her warm broth, checked her temperature, and even sat by her bedside for a while, quietly reading a book, her presence a comforting, unspoken solace. Eleanor had dismissed it then as a housekeeper going above and beyond, a rare moment of unexpected kindness. Now she realized it was a mother's instinct, a primal need to nurture her sick child. The memory brought a fresh wave of tears, a mixture of regret, and a strange, nascent tenderness. She knew she had to confront her adopted parents. It was a difficult conversation she dreaded, but one that was necessary for her to begin to piece together the shattered fragments of her identity. She drove to their sprawling estate in the countryside, a place of warmth and familiarity that now felt alien, tainted by the heavy weight of their secret. Robert and Elizabeth, both in their late 70s, greeted her with their usual affectionate embrace, unaware of the storm brewing within her. "Eleanor, darling, what a pleasant surprise!" Elizabeth exclaimed, her eyes twinkling. "We didn't expect you." Eleanor pulled away, her gaze cold, unwavering. "We need to talk, all of us, about Maria, about my birth mother." The smiles on their faces faltered, replaced by a stunned silence. Robert's hand, which had been reaching for her arm, dropped. Elizabeth's eyes widened, a flicker of fear, then profound sadness crossing her faces.
They led her to the living room, a place filled with cherished memories, now heavy with unspoken truths. Eleanor sat opposite them, her posture rigid, her heart a block of ice. "She found me," Eleanor stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "Maria, my maid. She's my biological mother." Elizabeth gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Robert closed his eyes for a moment, a deep sigh escaping his lips, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with unspoken confessions and decades of hidden pain. "We never meant for you to find out this way, darling," Elizabeth finally whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "We always planned to tell you when the time was right." "When was the right time, Mother?" Eleanor shot back, the anger finally breaking through her stoic facade. "When I cleaned her floors for 5 years? When I fired her for a dusty shelf? Was that the right time?" Robert opened his eyes, his gaze meeting hers, filled with a profound sorrow. "Eleanor, please try to understand. When we adopted you, it was a closed adoption. That was common back then. Your birth mother, Maria, she was so young, so vulnerable. She wanted you to have a completely fresh start, a life free from her struggles. She asked us not to seek her out, not to bring her into your life." "But you knew she was my maid," Eleanor interjected, her voice rising. "You saw her in my home. How could you not tell me?" Elizabeth shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't know, darling, not at first. When you hired her, we just thought she was another lovely housekeeper. We only recognized her a few months ago. We saw her at a family gathering here, serving. We recognized her from the old adoption papers, the name Maria Rodriguez, her picture. It was a shock." "And you said nothing?" Eleanor accused, her voice laced with betrayal. "We agonized over it, Eleanor. We truly did. We discussed it for weeks. But we remembered her wishes. She wanted you to have your own life, separate from hers. We thought if she wanted to reveal herself, she would. We didn't want to interfere, to complicate your life, to cause you pain. We thought we were protecting you, honoring her original wishes." "Protecting me?" Eleanor scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her. "You protected me from the truth. You protected me from knowing my own mother. You let me live a lie for 35 years. Elizabeth rose, coming towards Eleanor, her arms outstretched. "Oh, Eleanor, my precious girl, we only ever wanted what was best for you. We love you more than life itself. Every decision we made was out of love. We made mistakes, yes, but they were mistakes of the heart, not of malice." Eleanor pulled away, the embrace feeling suffocating, tainted by the weight of their deception. "Love doesn't justify lies, Mother. Not this kind of lie. This changes everything." The conversation continued for hours, a painful excavation of buried truths.
Eleanor learned more about the adoption process, the stringent rules, the desperate circumstances that led Maria to give her up. She saw the genuine pain and remorse in her adopted parents' eyes, the deep love they held for her that transcended the secret they had kept. But the wound of betrayal was deep, festering, and would take time to heal. She left her parents' estate that evening feeling utterly drained, but also with a sliver of understanding, a new perspective on the complex web of love and sacrifice that had woven her life. Her parents had made a choice, born of love and a misguided attempt at protection. Maria had made a choice, born of desperation and an even deeper love. And Eleanor, in her ignorance, had inflicted pain on both. The next morning, Eleanor found herself drawn back to the penthouse kitchen. It was empty, silent, devoid of Maria's quiet presence. The apartment, usually a sanctuary of order, now felt hollow, echoing with absence. The perfection she had once demanded now felt cold, sterile, meaningless. She found herself staring at the spot where Maria had stood, where she had delivered the earth-shattering revelation. The locket Maria had shown her, Eleanor still clutched in her hand, its worn silver warm against her palm. She opened it again, staring at the faded photographs, trying to reconcile the young, hopeful mother with the quiet, dignified maid she had known, and then fired. Eleanor realized then that she needed to talk to Maria again, not with anger, not with accusation, but with an open heart, a willingness to listen, to truly understand. The pain was immense, but beneath it, a strange, unfamiliar longing had begun to stir, a longing for connection, for truth, for the mother she had just discovered.
She found Maria's contact information in the HR files, a simple mobile number. Her hand trembled as she dialed, the sound of the ringing phone echoing loudly in the silent apartment. Maria answered on the third ring, her voice tentative, almost wary. "Hello?" "Maria," Eleanor began, her voice surprisingly steady, though her heart hammered in her chest. "It's Eleanor. I need to see you. I need to talk." A long silence stretched between them, pregnant with unspoken emotions. Then Maria's voice, soft and hesitant. "Are you sure, mi hija?" "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice firm, resolute. "I'm sure. Please, can you come back to the apartment? Just for a little while." Another pause. Then Maria's voice, thick with emotion. "Yes, Eleanor. I will be there." Eleanor hung up, her hands still trembling. The wait for Maria's arrival was agonizing, each minute stretching into an eternity. She found herself pacing the kitchen, then the living room, her eyes sweeping over the meticulously arranged space, now seeing it through a different lens. Every object, every corner, held the silent imprint of Maria's presence, her care, her unspoken love. When the doorbell finally chimed, her heart leapt into her throat. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself, to prepare for a conversation that would undoubtedly be the most difficult and perhaps the most important of her life. She opened the door to find Maria standing there, dressed in simple, clean clothes, not her uniform. Her face was etched with worry, her eyes still red from crying, but also held a flicker of hope, a fragile vulnerability that touched Eleanor deeply. "Come in, Maria," Eleanor said, stepping aside, her voice softer than she intended. Maria entered, her gaze sweeping around the apartment, a familiar sense of belonging mixed with a new, awkward hesitation. She stood uncertainly in the foyer, her hands clasped in front of her. "Please sit." Eleanor gestured towards the large sofa in the living room. She sat opposite her, trying to find the right words, the beginning of a conversation that had been delayed for decades. I spoke to my parents," Eleanor began, her voice quiet. "They told me their side of the story, about the adoption, about their reasons for not telling me. Maria nodded, her gaze fixed on Eleanor's face, searching for understanding, for forgiveness. "And what do you think, mi hija?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "I'm still angry. I'm angry that I was lied to, that this was kept from me. But I also understand. I understand why they did it. And I understand why you did what you did." A single tear traced a path down Maria's cheek, a silent testament to the pain and relief that warred within her. "I spent the last few days," Eleanor continued, her voice filled with a raw honesty, "replaying everything, every interaction we've had for the past 5 years, every word I said to you, every way I treated you." She paused, her voice cracking. "And I am so sorry, Maria, for everything, for my blindness, for my coldness, for my cruelty. I had no idea, but that's no excuse." Maria reached out, her hand gently covering Eleanor's, a gesture of comfort and forgiveness. "No, Eleanor, please don't say that. You didn't know. You were a child then, a woman living your life. You had no reason to suspect. It was my secret, my burden, not yours." Eleanor shook her head, tears finally escaping her own eyes, a torrent of long-suppressed emotion. They sat in silence for a long time, the quiet broken only by their soft sobs. The tears were cleansing, washing away years of unspoken pain, of hidden truths, of mistaken identities. Finally, Eleanor looked up, her eyes red but clear. "Tell me more, Maria. Tell me everything. About your life, about my father, about our family. I want to know it all. I want to know my history. I want to know my mother." Maria smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes, transforming her face, making her look years younger, imbued with a newfound lightness. "I will tell you everything, mi hija. Everything. There is so much to tell." And so Maria began to speak again, not just of the past, but of the present, of the hopes she had nurtured in secret, of the dreams she had for their future. She spoke of her family in the village, of her resilience, of her quiet strength. Eleanor listened, truly listened, for the first time, not as an employee to an employee, but as a daughter to her mother.
They spent hours talking, delving into the depths of their shared history, bridging the chasm of decades with words and tears and a burgeoning, fragile connection. Eleanor learned about her grandparents, her aunts and uncles, a whole side of her family she never knew existed. She learned about the traditions, the culture, the language that was her birthright. Maria, in turn, learned about Eleanor's life, her triumphs, her struggles, the woman she had become. The apartment, once a symbol of Eleanor's detached control, began to transform, slowly, subtly, into something else, a space for connection, for healing, for the forging of a new, unexpected family. Eleanor realized that the journey ahead would be long and complex. There would be awkward moments, difficult conversations, and the ongoing process of reconciling the two halves of her identity, the beloved adopted daughter of the Vances and the biological daughter of Maria. But for the first time in a long time, Eleanor felt a sense of wholeness, a profound connection to something larger than herself. As the evening drew to a close, Maria rose to leave, a quiet dignity in her movements. Eleanor stood with her, a new warmth blooming in her chest, a sense of belonging she hadn't known she was missing. "Maria," Eleanor said, her voice soft, "you don't have to go. Not yet. Not if you don't want to." Maria turned, her eyes wide with surprise, then filled with a deep, profound gratitude. "Are you sure, mija?" Eleanor nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "Yes, I'm sure. I want you to stay, not as my maid, but as my mother, as family."
Maria's lips trembled, and she nodded, tears once again streaming down her face. But these were tears of pure joy, of decades of longing finally fulfilled. She embraced Eleanor then, a hesitant, tender embrace that slowly grew in strength, a mother holding her long-lost daughter, a daughter finally finding her true origin. The embrace was clumsy, unfamiliar, yet profoundly comforting, a physical manifestation of a bond that had defied time, circumstance, and the rigid boundaries of class and expectation. Eleanor felt the warmth of Maria's body, the subtle scent of her, the softness of her hair against her cheek. It was an embrace she had never known, yet it felt strangely familiar, as if a missing piece of her soul had finally clicked into place. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to lean into the comfort, the raw, unconditional love that emanated from this woman, her mother. The city lights twinkled outside the panoramic windows, oblivious to the quiet miracle unfolding within the penthouse. The sterile gleam of the marble floors still reflected the light, but now Eleanor saw not just reflections of cold order, but glimmers of hope, of connection, of a future irrevocably, beautifully changed. This was not the end of a story, but the beginning of a new one, a story of two women, bound by blood and circumstance, finally finding their way back to each other, navigating the complexities of their past to forge a future built on truth, forgiveness, and the enduring, unbreakable bond of a mother's love. The journey would be arduous, filled with challenges, but Eleanor knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her heart, that she would not walk it alone. She had found her mother, and in doing so, she had finally found a missing part of herself. If this deeply emotional and transformative story resonated with you, and you appreciate tales of unexpected twists and profound human connection, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful narratives to life. Don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you.